Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the Brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants. Welcome back to the podcast, brothers. This is Rhit Moore, past master and current secretary of Fort Worth 148.
This is Billy Hamilton, senior steward for Fort Worth 148.
And this is Gabriel Jagush, Master Mason with Fort Worth 148. And this week, we have a special guest who is coming on for part 2.
And that's me, Chuck Dunning, from Haltom City Riverside, number 1331 in Haltom City, Texas.
Brother
Glad to
Chuck,
have you back.
It's great to have you back.
I'm glad to be here.
It's been 2 weeks, but good to have you back.
Time flies.
For those of you who are not aware, this is part 2 of our discussion with Chuck on Contemplative Masonry, both the book and the practice, because he wrote a book about the practice. So if you haven't listened to part 1, we released it 2 weeks ago. So go back and listen to that. It's worthwhile, and it doesn't really make sense to listen to part 2 without listening to part 1. You can find Contemplative Masonry on Amazon or at the Fort Worth Scottish Rite office. So if you haven't read that book, it would be helpful to do that because this episode is based on it.
Something that I wanted to say in the last episode, too, that I loved about this book so much is it's not your usual Masonic book that you pick up, read, put down. Oh, that was great. It actually has instructions, something that you're going to keep close to you for a long time and continually practice, because most books aren't a manual. They're just some useful information put in there. This actually has practice. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So today we'll be talking about the exercises that Chuck wrote, and we'll be talking about some of the more educational aspects of the book. And we'll also be talking a little bit very briefly about the Academy of Reflection, which is a contemplative project that Chuck is involved with. Right before we got into the main meat of the discussion, there's one question that I saw on Reddit. It's by the user Rocket Blush, and I'm just going to ask this and answer it right off the bat. Are there any lodges that accept women? I haven't been able to find one. And no politics involved in this answer. You are going to want, if you are a woman and you are interested in finding a lodge that accepts women, I would Google Co-Masonry or Le Droit Humain, which is spelled Le Droit Humain. Or you can just look up, the International Society for Freemasonry for Men and Women. But so if you're female and you want to get involved in Masonry, I'm not saying that life is going to... I'm not saying life is going to be easy, because there's a political landscape associated with co-masonry. But there are options for you out there. Anyway, now that I've stomped on that landmine as tactfully as I could, the user Local Dose on Reddit asked, serious question. Christian Freemasons, should I do it? Hi, everyone. I'm good friends with a Freemason, and I have the opportunity to petition a lodge that meets at the Grand Lodge building of Pennsylvania. I would like to have a conversation with a Freemason who believes in Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. I would really like their perspective and experience as a Christian Mason and what it would mean for me. I don't mean to offend by asking specifically for a Christian Mason. I just feel I would better relate with a person who shares the same belief system. Feel free to reply in open or private message. Thank you. So, Christian Freemasons, should I do it? What's y'all's take on that?
For me, when somebody asks me a question like that, when they're getting ready to join, oh man, I'm just like, you just knocked that one out of the park. That's a perfect question. You're what we're looking for. And then I'd get him with somebody that could, really answer those questions for him. But absolutely. I mean, I know guys that swear it directly relates to their religion as a Christian, and I know many that they just view it as compatible because that's what it's meant for.
Yeah. I would say that as a Christian, I have never I don't think I have ever once felt that I was doing anything that was against my beliefs, or even that was neutral towards my beliefs. Like, it is all contributed. Masonry is like a seasoning for the food of my religion, basically.
Well, and I would wonder for the brother who's asking that too, it's, maybe when you look online at Masonry, you do find a lot of anti-Masonic groups out there who try to claim that it is a non-Christian organization, and it doesn't believe in, it's against whichever religion you want. And for that too, you have to kind of consider the source, because it's possible to take anything out of context. And periodically I go through those just to kind of read through the stories, and a lot of it is really taken out of context.
I love them. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that I would also say is that in my experience, I have met ministers from just about every major, I would say every major Christian denomination. I have met ministers who are Masons. And I think that speaks pretty clearly to how compatible the Masonic experience can be with the Christian faith.
Yep. And no spoilers on this one, but given the content of the master's degree, I feel that at least in Preston Webb Ritual, there are some pretty explicit, or at least very thinly veiled Christian concepts happening on. So I would say for any Christian that is worried about Masonry, really don't be. You can ask the vast majority. Percentage-wise, most Masons in the United States are going to be Christian, just as a matter of statistics, and you can talk to them, and I don't think you're ever going to hear complaints about it. So,
but keep doing your homework.
Yeah,
you're on the right path.
Yeah, don't get involved in something you're not comfortable with, and that applies to Masonry too. So.
Yeah, that's his job and our job. Don't let them join without them knowing what they're getting into.
So, yep. Let's jump right into the meat of the subject, and we're going to start off with a bunch of questions about the exercises that Chuck has written and developed and presented in his book. And you had a question about meditation.
Yeah, I figure we start out with the basic concepts. I think Chuck, that meditation is not a practice that's real common, especially in American culture. And, I had the conversation with my dad on the way home. I was like, I don't ever recall there being any educational papers or anything on meditation. So kind of what is it, and how does a newbie get started in it?
All right. I think what I'd like to do is answer your question directly, but I also want to, and maybe I'm anticipating a question here, but I want to address another thing along the way. And that is that I use both the words contemplation and meditation, and I'd like to distinguish between those two because depending upon who you read, you'll get different answers to those questions. So to start with your first question, the way that I conceptualize meditation is simply the intentional focus of awareness. That meditation is actively changing your state of mind to focus on a particular thing in a particular way. Now, that may be focusing in a really narrow way. It may be focusing in a really broad way. So, for example, one of the most popular forms of meditation is to just sit down, close your eyes, be quiet, be still, and focus on your breath. And there are benefits to doing that, to allowing that process to calm you and to bring you deeper peace and relaxation. And then there are all other kinds of meditation. There are kinds of meditations that really engage the imagination, for example, that you can travel into the imagination and see and feel and hear, experiencing something really, really clearly. And a great example of that in popular culture is professional and Olympic athletes. They use their imaginations in order to experience doing the thing that they do in their performance as clearly as possible, so that it is deeply internalized for them, and it makes it easier for their bodies then to respond in the ways that they want, that they will get the most optimal performance from. There's been some good research done on this, that people who visualize themselves executing an athletic task actually perform it better than those who only practice physically. And fighter pilots do this too, by the way. It's used all over the place. Martial artists, for example. And so meditation is really broad, but it has to do with the intentional focus of awareness, and it usually is a formalized process of some sort or another. Although people can enter a meditative state, a really focused state of consciousness, in lots of different ways. Some people, that happens when they're running. If they run for health purposes and because they enjoy running, then sometimes what happens is they find themselves, their minds becoming focused on a particular thing while they're running, and it actually becomes a kind of meditation for them. People that are, I grew up hunting and fishing, and I know that there were times when I was out there in the woods and just absolutely absorbed in the beauty of nature. And that's a kind of meditation. Yeah, go ahead.
So basically what you're saying is you don't have to get out the yoga mat, sit cross-legged, light the candle in the quiet, dark corner of your room.
No, you don't have to do those things. Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that we have, that, when we talk about contemplative masonry and things, people are, I don't have time to sit in the corner and meditate on that. It's not necessarily that, because I'm with you. When I'm out working in the field and I'm doing manual labor, I notice things, and they, ideas open up to me because I'm just aware of the beauty of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And what it provides, how it works. And you just start chasing down this rabbit hole in your head. And next thing you know, you're admiring a tadpole swimming in the pond,
Yeah.
And that's part of the whole process.
Yeah.
And part of meditation. And I think if we recognize that, it would become more socially acceptable to say, yeah, I meditate. Because
right. And, so that gets to what I was saying earlier about the use of the word contemplate, or contemplative, or contemplation. And one of the reasons why I call my book Contemplative or Contemplative Masonry instead of Meditative Masonry is because I think most of us are a little more familiar with the word contemplation. I think we think of it as more accessible. I think people often say things like, I need to contemplate that. And what we mean when we say that is, I just need to think about that a little more deeply. And sorry about the phone here.
Yeah.
And so we say we just need to think about something more deeply when we're using the word contemplate. And so when I am using the word contemplative or contemplative or contemplation in this book, and as I talk to Masons, I'm using it in the same way that it's used in Masonic ritual, which is to talk about a state of reverent searching for deeper insight into things. And different traditions have different meanings for the word contemplation. In some traditions, that has a very specific meaning, but I'm using it in the broader general sense here because I want Masons to understand that having a deeper, more insightful experience of Masonry and an experience that will help them live their Masonry more fully doesn't require them to do what you were saying about getting a yoga mat and trying to sit in one of those impossible postures. And, are there benefits to doing that? Yeah, there are benefits to doing that, but you don't have to do that to be a contemplative Mason.
No, and I think that's something that you can work up to as you see the benefits. It's just like running. I'm not going to go out and run a half a marathon, strap on my shoes. I'm going to go out and run maybe half a mile the first shot,
Yeah.
And you'll work up to that. You'll see the value in it. One of my great examples is I I was given the Fellowcraft lecture at one point, and I stopped dead in my tracks. I was describing the pillars, and we describe them one way, and then they were represented in our slideshow that we give the candidate another way, and it just stopped me dead in my tracks to where I had to go write down a little note to remind me what the thought it gave me. And it led me down to, the Phoenicians and what they did and the knowledge they had, all because I was aware in the moment and actually thinking about the words that are coming out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Which it's a form of contemplation.
It is. And the popular term for that kind of state of mind right now is mindfulness. Everybody's talking about mindfulness. And you can, it's in all kinds of business magazines. It's everywhere. And simply put, mindfulness is just thinking about what you're doing while you're doing it. And that sounds really simple, doesn't it? But there is so much that we do when we're on autopilot. We're not even conscious. You know how it is. You're driving down the road and you experience highway hypnosis. Suddenly it's an hour has passed and you don't even remember anything from the point you got into the car until you're where you are,
Yeah.
And the same thing can happen in Masonic ritual. If we're not mindful of what we're doing, we're not really thinking about the ritual and what it's saying. Then we're not being as fully present and involved with it, and not getting as much out of it or giving as much to it as we might.
Completely agree. I mean, it's about self-improvement. And although my candidate had to suffer a little bit because I interrupted the lecture, it's about my improvement. So, the book's full of exercises, and I can't recommend to guys enough to, if nothing else, grab it for that. But could you give the listeners a few examples of kind of what the exercises you have in there?
Sure. So one of the things that I do is I really want to start people off with this experience of thinking about what you're doing while you're doing it. And so in the work for the entered apprentice degree, I talk about the importance of being present, of being right here, right now, and being aware of what we're doing. And so I provide some exercises that challenge us to, in our regular daily activities, but then also in our lodge experience, to go in and pay attention to our sensory perceptions. Masonry teaches us a lot about the importance of paying attention to our senses. So why not? Let's do that, Go into lodge with the attitude that while I'm at lodge and I am going through the ritual, or I'm observing the ritual, or maybe it's the opening and closing for the stated meeting, or maybe it's the discussion about the payment of bills, or where are we going to get the money for the scholarship fund, or whatever, to not just be thinking intellectually about what's going on, not just be trying to solve whatever problem might be raised, but to be aware of what's actually happening, what you're hearing and what it's like to hear that, and what kinds of actions you're involved in, what movements you're making, and why are you making those movements, and how are you making those movements, and to be fully present. So that's one of the kinds of things, is to learn how to bring a more complete presence when we come into lodge, or whatever it is that we're doing.
You'd mentioned paying attention to every step and word, and I think that's so crucial because we have a ritual, and years ago, I used to think the Committee on Work was a little overbearing at trying to make that, keeping us all in step anyways. And now I understand the value in it because, there's a commonality of doing that ritual the same, making those same steps. There's a purpose in all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. There are definite benefits that we can gain.
Yeah. I mean, not only from the process of learning it, because being immersed with men that know that, I mean, you're going to get so much value out of that aside from ritual. But then again, once you've learned it, you get to teach it. And there's some real magic in teaching. It doesn't matter what you're teaching.
It's true.
So I experience both ADHD and tinnitus And so I've got those are two big things that help, that ADHD prevents me really from keeping still, and then tinnitus makes it kind of difficult for me to sit still in terms of just opening up and letting myself be aware of my environment. Because one, I've got to be like tapping my foot or doing something or just being in motion somehow, and the other one, it feels like, I've got this high pitched going on whenever it gets real quiet in the room. So, do you have any advice for students that have a lot of difficulty concentrating or sitting still?
Well, first of all, I will say that I can relate. I have tinnitus too. And I'm also absolutely sure that had there been a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder when I was a young guy, a teenager, that I would have been diagnosed with that. I mean, and I'm speaking to you as a mental health professional who's familiar with this diagnosis. I'm absolutely sure that I would have been. And it wasn't until after I had started practicing meditation one time that I was in college. And by the way, I bombed out after my first year of college because I couldn't handle it. I was a little too attention deficit disorder. I just couldn't handle it. But I went back and was starting to practice meditation. And I remember one day I was studying and I looked at my watch and I realized how long I had been focused on this particular thing that I was studying. And it just occurred to me all of a sudden, I never could have done this before. How is this happening that I've been able to hold my attention on this for this long? And I realized it was because of the practice of meditation. And so one of the things that I really try to do is help people understand that meditation is something that everybody can do, but the expectations that you have for what the meditative experience is going to be like can sometimes be problematic. If you think that meditation must mean you close your eyes and you're perfectly still and you get no distraction and you have the quote unquote no thoughts, you're going to be really disappointed and frustrated, and you're going to think, I can't do this. Yeah. Well, the truth is that even really experienced meditators still get distracted, still find themselves fidgeting sometimes, still find themselves having to redirect their minds to the task at hand. And what happens is that you just realize that's just part of meditation too. And it's a good part of meditation to catch yourself and go, oh, okay, I'll just redirect and put my attention back where I want it to be. And sometimes you have to do that over and over and over again, but that's good practice.
Yeah, that was one of the things that has helped me in my meditation is that thought process of, oh, okay, I had that thought, or, oh, I experienced that distraction. Mm-hmm. I acknowledge that is a thought that I had, or that is a distraction that I experienced. Okay, cool. Let's move on.
Yeah.
It's okay. So this happened. Grasp it, examine it, and then send it go. Just send it off.
Yeah.
So some of the the exercises in your book vary all the way from simple breathing exercises all the way to fairly detailed, involved visualizations of a lodge room and the ancient characters in a lodge room. Which one of the exercises in your book do you personally find the most challenging to perform?
Oh, well. Huh. Nobody has ever asked me that question, Gabe. Good job. That's excellent.
You stumped the professor.
It's tough because I'm gonna change the way that I answer this, because for me, I'm so practiced at all of them that it's hard for me to say that currently any one of them is harder for me to do than the other. But what I will say is that 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 developing the skills to be able to do that last kind of meditation that you talked about really involved visualizations, about imagining myself walking into a lodge room and seeing it as clearly as possible, like being in a dream, like actually that kind of clarity. Mm-hmm. And engaging with the characters in the lodge room, our traditional characters in the lodge room, that takes a lot of time to develop that kind of skill. Now, some people have more talent for it than others, but everybody has a basic level of talent for that. I mean, and it can be developed. Whatever level of talent you have can be developed. And so I would say that the thing that took the most work for me was developing that ability.
Okay. Now, are there any exercises that you developed and wrote up but didn't use in the book?
Oh my gosh.
That sounds like there might have been a few.
It's a whole brain full of them.
Yeah, there are a bunch of them.
Awesome.
Yeah, and not just that I developed, but the things that I have learned from other traditions and other systems. Most of these things in the book are adaptations of things that I learned from other traditions and systems and saw their relevance to the Masonic experience. I practiced them myself, so they're not just hypotheticals. They're things that I actually tried and made sure, this works and it's relevant and others can get something out of this. But my gosh, I mean, I've studied so many different systems and traditions and practiced so many different kinds of meditation that, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine how many we would be talking about.
So there's a book 2 is what you're saying.
Yeah, in fact, I am working on book 2.
Yes.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. Book 2 will be The Contemplative Lodge, Masons Doing Inner Work Together.
And that's something that really hit me with these exercises is that what a great way to start an education program in your lodge. Just go pick a couple of these exercises and discuss them with your brothers at lodge. We have a night that we do that. It's a little less common now, to where we sit down and talk about things like that. And I'm just amazed every time at the things that brothers will open up about.
Yeah.
And it's a great way to get something started with that. And I love that you're tying it into the lodge next time. That'd be great.
Well, it's one of the things that brothers have been asking for as I go around and talk about the book. The book is primarily written for individual Masons to practice contemplative things, to do contemplative work and different kinds of meditation. And as I go around and travel and talk about that work, often what I do is I facilitate a contemplative experience for whatever lodge that I'm talking to. So I'll lead them in some sort of meditation, and then we have a discussion about the meditation afterwards. And they're like, "Oh, we want more of this. This needs to be, And so it's like, okay, I got it. I'll write a book about that. And yeah,
that's awesome. Good deal.
Okay. Well, so Chuck, earlier you were talking about the different systems and traditions you looked at when developing your contemplative masonry exercises.
Mm-hmm.
Would you mind sharing some of those influences, both Masonic and non-Masonic, that went into this?
Yeah, sure. Well, on the Masonic side, I don't know. I was unaware, and I'm still unaware of anything predating my book that actually specifies any actual exercises in terms of contemplative practice or meditation. I think prior to my book, there were lots of authors that talked about the benefits of meditating on things or contemplating things, but nobody ever talked about the techniques or the methods of meditation and contemplation. So I found a lot of inspiration from people like Albert Pike and Manly P. Hall and Joel P. Lightfoot and Albert Mackey and A.S. McBride is another one that I got a lot out of as a younger Mason. J.D. Buck. I could just go on and on. I mean, there are lots of them out there. George Steinmetz. So all of those, they inspired me. But in terms of actual practice, my primary techniques that I learned initially were from two sources. So my teacher, my mentor, that was my philosophy professor, John Miller. He taught me some meditations that basically come out of largely out of the Theosophical Society, and are kind of variations on Kundalini Yoga.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's a book called I think it's something like Kundalini Awakening or something like that, a gentle approach to Kundalini Yoga that really closely correlates with what my teacher taught me initially, the kinds of meditation. And it has to do with activating the different energy centers in the body and learning how to focus on each of them and the energies, the emotional and psychological and intellectual things that associate with each of those energy centers. And then I also learned some things along the way about some Eastern meditations. So Zazen, for example, which is basically just silent sitting, which sounds, when I say basically and just, it sounds really simple. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot going on there, but boy, talk about a difficult practice. Zazen is one of the most challenging of all practices, but certainly one of the most basic. And then the other major influence early on like that was also on the therapeutic side. So learning some techniques that were used in therapeutic settings. Progressive relaxation is one. How to really, really relax the body so that you can become more aware, more peaceful, but also more aware of what's happening internally, and kind of sort through your feelings about things more carefully. And the practice of empathy, being able to be emotionally aware and sensitive to what other people are experiencing. There are lots of therapeutic practices along those lines. And then after I'd been doing that for a while, I knew that I was ready for a kind of next step. And that's when I met my teacher in Hermeticism. And so I learned and practiced a lot of the methods that are typically practiced in most of the modern Hermetic schools today, offshoots of the Hermetic Golden Dawn, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Although there are things that I learned that I still haven't seen written up anywhere in popular literature, some of those methods and techniques are still apparently pretty carefully guarded. At least the ones that I learned. I've learned some Taoist, and particularly through some kind of Qigong kind of practices. And so, yeah, just really kind of all over the place. But I think the things that I've had the most practice were the things that my mentor taught me in terms of, like I said, a kind of gentle approach to Kundalini Yoga, some therapeutic techniques, and the practices that are used in modern Hermeticism.
Okay.
Yeah, what you describe. Well, it's funny that you brought up Qigong or Qigong or however you want to say it. I've heard it called all sorts of different things, but Qigong,
yeah, right.
When I was practicing your centering exercise, right, and you talk about really feel your earlobe, really feel the left side of your face, and then you're just thinking about that body part. And when I was in high school, one of the things that I was an active martial arts student, and one of our school was Kung Fu. And one of the 5 kind of pillars that we built our school off of was the practice of Qigong, right?
Yeah.
And when I was practicing the centering exercise, I had to stop, and reeled it back and I went, man, that's so cool, because I felt the same sensations when I was doing the centering exercise as when I was, in the poses of moving through Qigong exercises, which I was blown away by that. I was like, wow, like I can feel my body heat moving to different parts of my body. I can feel the, energy of each body part. Some people say it's the chi. I'm still kind of up in the air on that one as to whether or not you're actually moving energy, but you can certainly feel something going on.
Well, sure, yeah.
But what are your thoughts? See, now that you bring up Qigong and stuff, what are your thoughts on active meditation techniques like Tai Chi and mandala coloring and even stuff like Sufi whirling and that kind of thing?
I think they're all good things. I think that they obviously produce significant results for their practitioners. I have a good friend that has written up a form, an actual form of movement meditation that's based on the steps and signs for the Blue Lodge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I think that sort of thing can be really attractive to some people. There's some people there, that they'd be more likely to do that kind of thing than to sit down and try to be still. And so, I think anybody that's interested in that sort of thing, try it out.
So can you walk us through the process of designing a contemplative exercise? And I guess sub-question to that, how would you say that your design process differed for more introductory ones, like the breathing exercise or the centering exercise, as opposed to more complex ones like the lodge meditations and the I am, what am I exercise? So how would you design those?
How did I design them? Well, like I said earlier, to a great degree, what I've done is just adapted techniques that are used in different systems to the Masonic system. I, through my own practice of those techniques, experienced that they naturally resonated with parts of the Masonic tradition. And so then I began to practice them within that context and make some adjustments here or there. Oftentimes it's just in the language, just using language that engages Masonic symbolism with a practice, so that connection is really clear and it's easy to see and feel the relevance. But the design of a contemplative practice, so the main things are, first of all, you kind of have to know what is the general objective of a particular practice. What part of the psyche or parts of the psyche does it primarily engage or focus upon? Because you'll remember I said I define meditation as the intentional practice or the intentional focus of awareness. So each technique has a tendency to lead us into engaging particular part or parts of the psyche. And so you need to know that. You need to know what those parts are. And then in addition to that, each technique may involve different aspects of the psyche in getting there. And so how does that happen? And so just being familiar with all of those things and recognizing, okay, this part of the Masonic experience encourages us to use this part of the psyche and in this particular way. So what technique out there, what method of working with consciousness matches up with that? And so I look for those connections. And then basically just use a certain format, a general kind of format for getting people through the process of initially relaxing and centering and trying to focus their mind, and then start to move in the direction, use the different aspects of the psyche that will move their consciousness into that focal area that deals with this particular portion of the Masonic experience that I want us to draw our attention to.
So, Chuck, I was looking online and I came across a 7-week course that one of the SRIA colleges had put forth, which is Societas Rosicrucia in Anglia, and it did have a lot of information there about different meditation exercises over the 7-week course, on Masonic topics and esoteric topics. And I was wondering if you were familiar with those and if there were any similarities or contrasts between their exercises and the exercises in your book.
No, Billy, this is news to me. I think if that had existed publicly when I was doing all of the research that I did for the first book, I would have known. But this is absolutely news to me. I'm intrigued.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. So let's say I wanted to compose a series of contemplative exercises for something outside of the craft lodge, like the chapter Rose Croix or like the Cryptic Council.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on how you would go about adapting those exercises to different systems or from writing exercises from scratch?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the first things I would do is to look for clear connections between a degree and some other tradition or system out there. And it's, so you mentioned Chapter Rose Croix, and that's really easy, right?
There's that one is an example.
it's really easy because it's got all of that Rosicrucian symbolism in there, and there are plenty of traditions that work with that symbolism that have meditations and contemplative practices that engage that symbolism. And so, the first question is, what can we adapt from another tradition that fits within what we're doing here? And we have to be careful because sometimes these things that are present in other traditions, we can't just take them out of context. We have to pay attention to what is the context they're in, and are there preliminary things that lead up to this particular kind of work that they're doing, and have we provided the kind of preliminary experiences that are necessary, or is this something that really can stand alone? And so going through that process is really, really important, and it takes a pretty good knowledge of the source tradition, and you need to be able to be faithful to that, because otherwise, we start running into the problem of just dabbling. And there's a lot of warnings in esoteric literature about dabbling, about just taking a little here and a little there without any kind of real sustaining structure and progression to what we're doing. And so I think keeping that in mind is really important. In terms of coming up with something novel, and being innovative, I think that in itself takes, in my experience, it takes someone who has a pretty significant background in meditative work. They have done a lot of exploration of consciousness. They understand how the different aspects of the psyche interact with each other, what kinds of things are likely to amplify some parts of the psyche while sublimating other parts of the psyche. And that's kind of where you start. Well, to use Masonic language, that's you're no longer an apprentice or even a craftsman at that point. When you're able to really begin to be creative in your work, that's master level work. And I'm trying to be really cautious now about saying that, because I'm not trying to give the impression that I'm some kind of master, But what I am saying is that that's the kind of work that a person can do once they have really put a lot of labor into developing the skills and the nuances of contemplative practice. That's just not something that people jump right into and do well.
Well, you say you're not the master, but you wrote the book on it, Chuck. At some point in our lives, we have to get good at something. This is your niche, man. You're the master.
Well,
wear that hat.
I do realize that I'm providing something that nobody else has done before.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that I'm just the tip of the iceberg here. I'm kind of like the point of the spear.
Yeah.
And that what will happen is that other brothers will be inspired to put in the kind of work that I have put in to develop their craftsmanship with this kind of work, and then offer what they've learned and what they've developed to help other Masons do that. And you know how things grow, right?
Yeah.
And the students eventually, ideally, excel the teacher. And that's, I would love to see that happen.
That's the natural progression. It's the way it should work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and jump on into kind of the more education-based questions. And some of these are still going to be exercise-oriented, but I was trying to find a good way to divide these questions all up into different categories. And some of them blur the line a little bit. But I wanted to ask, in the section, to seek a master's wages, you present a discussion on the lost word.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about one of the potential keys to the lost word, the ancient Sanskrit word Om.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the history of Om within contemplative practices and within Masonry?
Sure. So we know that Om has been used for thousands of years. We can go back to the most ancient Vedic texts, such as the Upanishads, and the authors are clearly recommending the chanting of Om and meditation upon Om, silent meditation upon Om, as a key to unlocking some of the most significant potentials of the human psyche. Om is said to be the sound of creation, of manifestation itself. In Pythagorean philosophy, it's called the music of the spheres. And each of the three sounds within Om, Ah, O, and are said to correspond to states of consciousness, that each one of them represents a different phase or state of consciousness. So the Ah being the normal waking state, and the O being the dreaming state, and the representing the state of dreamless sleep. And then the silence around and between repetitions of the chant represents the essence of consciousness itself. And we can find that word in the Western world. Actually, we know that there were Buddhists in Greece and in the Mediterranean in times before Christ, and even during the time of Christ, that there were Buddhists in the Mediterranean region of the world. There's no doubt that they would have brought the use of this word with them, and that Westerners would have learned it. We know that there were Westerners educated Westerners who were familiar with the word and its use in England and in the European continent in the late 1600s and early 1700s, that people were familiar. They knew that word. And then it shows up in Masonic ritual. It shows up in the third degree. And Pike writes about this, and he's not the only one. There are a number of Masonic authorities who talk about the three ruffians' names in the third degree, and how the ending of each of those names is different. The root of each name is the same, but the ending is different. And if you take those three endings and you put them together, the sound that they make is Om. And even if that was just a pure coincidence, because it's not, to the best of my understanding, it's actually not a matter of actual Hebrew names. There's only one of those, to my understanding, that's an actual Hebrew name. Even if that was just a wild coincidence, Masons of the time, educated Masons of the time, would have seen it and would have thought, oh, that's interesting. That's significant. I'm going to think about that. I'm going to meditate on that one. And so the fact that it's continued to be there is meaningful to me, and I'm not the only one. Lots of Masons have written about that.
Right. So like you mentioned, Aum is a super important word in Vedic history, and it's got profound meaning. Do you feel that it might be more difficult for Westerners to understand and get value out of the Aum mantra without having the cultural background associated with it? Because I've heard that criticism of Tibetan Buddhism in the United States. And, for anyone that doesn't know, I used to be a practicing Buddhist. And without the cultural context, you lose a lot of value there. So I'm wondering, do we see that in Aum as well?
Yeah, I think there's real potential there. I think that we have a duty, if we're going to engage with that word in a contemplative way, we have a duty to study that word, where it comes from, how it's used, what it means, And so, for example, I mean, my exposure to it has been, as I said earlier, primarily through the Upanishads. And so, I think we have a responsibility there. One of the words that I often offer to Westerners who aren't entirely comfortable with the word Aum is the word Amen instead. Mm-hmm. And my own practice of chanting the word Amen has produced very similar kinds of experiences as chanting Om. And Amen has a lot of significance for us as Westerners. Most of us have been using that word our entire lives, particularly those of us who grew up in religious homes and religious environments. And it's certainly significant to us as Freemasons. We use it all the time. And when we say "so mote it be," all we're doing is we're translating the word Amen into English. And so the word Amen is both an affirmation is used as both an affirmation of things as they are, as well as a plea for something to be made so. And so there's I think a lot of depth and value and power in the word Amen for those who aren't comfortable with the word Om.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, to me, phonetically, they sound similar. I was, oh my gosh, I'm trying to remember this name, but I follow this one guru on YouTube, and he travels around India talking about stuff. And he was talking about how, at least in his view, Amen is derived from Aum, and how the very Amen is a very American sort of corruption.
Yeah.
We got to make it our own.
Sadhguru is the guy I'm thinking of. Sadhguru. Sadhguru. But yeah, Sadhguru was talking about that. They're the same word. And so.
Yeah. Well, and then there's also, the Egyptian god Amun. Mm-hmm. And there are people that like Sadhguru there that argue that the Sanskrit Aum is the origin of both the Egyptian Amun and the Semitic Amen.
Mm-hmm. How effective do you feel that the Aum mantra meditation is in comparison to the other exercises in contemplative Masonry?
I think that's going to vary to some extent from one individual to another. I think that for some people, that it could have extremely profound effects. But for others, they're going to notice that after they're done chanting it, they're going to notice that they just feel really different. Mm-hmm. And that's about all that's ever going to happen for them on a conscious level. There may be some other things going on at an unconscious level for them, though, and I think that that's always likely. That there's more going on underneath the surface than we're typically aware of with whatever we're doing. And it's hard to say. And so this is one of the things that I have to say about the exercises in the book is that it's entirely possible that one exercise may have a really very profound, effect on somebody, and another exercise may just kind of, it's like, okay, I don't really see what the deal is there. But the important thing, I think, is to give each exercise a really thorough shot, to really practice it and stick with it for a while. And one of the things that happens a lot of times for people that do this sort of thing is that they try things. If it doesn't produce some sort of dramatic result immediately, well, then they just cast it aside. It's often persisting over time, even beyond the state of boredom with something, that the benefits of a particular kind of meditative practice begin to emerge and make themselves known. We have to realize that there is more going on within our souls and within our psyches than we're ever really consciously aware of at any moment. And meditation helps unlock those things. And so if we're going to give meditation the opportunity to facilitate those kinds of developments, then we have to let go of the idea that our conscious mind is just going to decide when it's going to happen or not going to happen.
All right. So, Rhit, you had a bunch of questions written down, so I'm going to let you off the chain.
So the first one I had, you've used this term a few times. What is a Masonic esotericist?
Okay. It's simply a person who is interested in the deeper potentials of Masonry, of its symbolism, of its words, of its ritual, and wants to know what's beneath the surface, what's behind the veil of our symbols, what's behind the superficial meanings of our words. How can I get deeper into that, and in the process learn more about what Masonry really is and its potentials for transforming me and my life? That's essentially what a Masonic esotericist is, because esoteric just means that which is within.
Yeah. So you also had a point in there where you said the Masonic esotericist shouldn't rely on the ideas or thinkings of early ritualists, or to simply perpetuate what they found. Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
Yeah. I don't think we should limit ourselves to what our early Masonic authorities and ritualists have said that things mean. We're charged to be speculative Masons, or speculative Masons, according to the proper pronunciation in our jurisdiction. And speculative means to think deeply about things, to consider other possibilities of meaning. That's the way it was. That's the meaning that it had when it was used in those, for the first time in those early Masonic contexts, was to consider what else might this mean. Well, nowhere in the Masonic fraternity are we told that all the speculating is done, that it's all been done for us, and now our job is just to learn what other people speculated and came up with. We are speculative Masons. That means we are supposed to be speculating. And that means we don't settle for what other people say. We listen, we learn from, we may even adopt and adapt things that other people have said, and deeply value what other people have said, but we don't assume that that's where things stop.
Yeah, no, it's one of the first things I tell candidates is you got to make this craft your own.
Yes.
There's been some great stuff said, but you got to write your own story.
Mm-hmm.
So questions and answers is always something, especially for the new candidate coming in, learning those EA. It seems a mile long and a mountain so high. Where do you see the value or the importance of those questions and answers?
Oh my gosh, I think there are a number of different ways that it's valuable. For one thing, I mean, just the exercise of pushing the mind to memorize things that clearly is it's a worthwhile exercise. I think that there are benefits that come from just doing that. But I think that it does two other things that are of even more importance. And so number one is it provides us with opportunities to think about our ritual. That when we're asked one of those questions, or we ask one of those questions of ourselves, we're not just setting up the conversation for the next thing that's prescribed to say. There's a part of our minds that's going back to the ritual, that going back to our experience of the ritual. Many of us are actually seeing in our minds what was happening in the lodge room, or imagining the historical scene that is described. So the questions and answers are actually engaging, or have the potential at least to engage our minds, our psyches, in a very holistic kind of way. And that gives us an opportunity to discuss with each other. Now, this is not an opportunity that often happens. Most of the time, our instructors in the questions and answers are just really focusing on getting us to learn them.
Yeah.
And they don't give us the opportunity to talk about them. But when we ask the question, whence came you? What if we actually challenge the candidate to answer that question for himself in a way that was meaningful to him beyond just what happened in the ritual? But where do you come from? Where do you come from? That's a profound question. And so to be able to ask that question in a way that not only learns the prescribed words, but provides a platform for deeper thought is important. And then there's another thing here, and it also relates to this holistic kind of way that the questions and answers engage us, is that they help push the events of the ritual and the symbols, the visual symbols that we use and the words that we use. It helps push that stuff into our minds and plant it more deeply into our unconscious. And that then makes those things more usable by the unconscious mind as a symbolic language to communicate to us. So, you were talking earlier about how you might be out doing something and all of a sudden you have this insight. Oh, wow. Something about your Masonic experience comes back to you, and you make a connection between that and your life that you never made before. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the reasons that you can do that is because you've spent so much time programming all of that symbolism into your consciousness. Your mind is going to take advantage of that and is going to make use of it.
I love it. Yeah. So I got one last question, then I'll pass it off to Gabe on the subject.
All right.
So you make a lot of references about how, especially in our monitor in Texas, and our ritual work itself encourages us to meditate or mm-hmm. be contemplative Masons. Mm-hmm. But I said earlier, I've never heard that subject breached in Lodge, much less many papers on it. Why do you think that is?
I'm not entirely sure. I think I have at least parts of it. And I think from person to person, some of the things may be different. But I think part of it is that in the Western world, some of our ideas about masculinity have gotten in the way.
Yeah.
This is not something that quote unquote real men do. We make fun at people for sitting around and contemplating their navels. Right. We kind of, there's always been a kind of strong anti-intellectual spirit in American society. We don't quite really trust people that spend a lot of time in their heads. And so I think those are part of it. And then also it's just a matter of momentum. We talked earlier about, in the previous episode, we talked about how the social level of initiation is where most of Masonry happens. That's where most Masons are. That means there's a lot of power and energy that's focused at that level. And anything that tries to get outside of that context, or that would seem to kind of urge brothers to move outside of that context, is going to get a pushback. That's just a phenomena of nature. It's not something that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It just happens. And so there's, those are all things that anybody that's really interested in this contemplative stuff has to push against. And part of that also is that there just haven't been many people that have, in common everyday language and life, been able to talk about contemplative practice and meditative practice in a way that's meaningful. It's all, for a long, long time, it has been, it's been a subject that has been in the domain of academics, or in the domain of people that are practicing fringe religions, or practicing religions from other cultures, and now these things are coming more and more into the mainstream every day, and I just think the timing has made it much more approachable for Masons now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because I had the thought when you were saying that, because dealing with masculinity, and we kind of, our meditative moments of men, we hide under, I'm going hunting, or I'm going fishing.
Right.
Because I love to dove hunt, and I go out with a couple brothers of ours, and some of the deepest conversations I've had is around that campfire, supposedly hunting.
Yeah.
And if we'd just be honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
It's not a slight on your masculinity if you want to know what's going on in your head.
No. Actually, I think that one of the things Masonry is telling us is that mature masculinity necessitates us. If we want to mature in masculinity, if we want to realize the fullest possibilities of masculinity, we have to be intensely aware of what's happening inside of us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask, what books or other resources do you find are possibly counterproductive or even damaging for Masons, contemplative practitioners, or students of mystic practices?
Oh, I don't have any particular titles in mind for you that I would say don't read that. But there are a lot of books out there that are written kind of in a new age kind of way of if you do this practice, it's going to make you a more prosperous person. You're going to make more money. You're going to you're going to be able to fulfill all your dreams in life, that kind of stuff. I would be very wary of any kind of book that promises those kinds of results from the kind of work that we're talking about. It's very clear to me that these things can enhance your ability to be creative and to be productive and to reap the rewards of those things. But books that draw on that particular motivation, do this series of meditations and you'll be rich and famous. People will be jealous of you and they'll love the car that you're driving. And, I think that's that really what that's about is making money for the people that wrote the book.
So kind of like a prosperity gospel version of esotericism.
Well said. Yes.
Okay, so I had one more question kind of from our education section, and then I guess maybe we can move into what I guess erroneously titled behind the scenes. I don't know why I called it that, but what Masonic rites or degrees, and that's including irregular and or defunct work if need be, do you feel leads to the most natural adoption of contemplative practices by the members of the organization and or candidates of those degrees?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that there are very clear things happening in the Scottish Rite along those lines. And I know the Scottish Rite degree so well that, I mean, it's just, I mean, each one of them in its own way is pointing us to turn within ourselves. But I think I'm just going to talk about one of my favorites here as an example, because we've already touched on it, the Knight Rose Croix, the 18th degree in the Scottish Rite.
I love that degree.
Yeah. And not every jurisdiction, really provides all of the lecture that's available from Pike in that degree. But there's this lecture in there about the weaving the tapestry of life, and how it's composed of both dark threads and light threads, and that even the things that we would very naturally respond to as evil and dark and painful, and the things in life that we want to avoid, that if we could see all of those things from the perspective of someone who has passed beyond this world, if we could see everything from the point of view of the divine, what we would see is actually a very beautiful tapestry in life. And that we have to have all of the different colors of those threads in order for that tapestry to be woven with the greatest beauty. And I love that. And I think that it challenges us to be really deeply contemplative about our judgments of what is good and what is not good, and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And then that degree also talks about the law of love. And it talks about Jesus of Nazareth being the teacher of the law of love. And regardless of what you think about Jesus in terms of a religious context, or whether you are a believer in Jesus as your Lord and Savior or not, you can still see the great wisdom in the law of love, and that is, that practicing love is the thing that makes it possible for us to bring together in harmony all of the different apparently conflicting things in our lives. That is a very profound contemplative practice. And that's an example. Outside of Freemasonry, I've talked about the Hermetic traditions. I think that there are a number of Hermetic orders and schools out there right now that are offering wonderful opportunities to do very meaningful inner work. I think the Society of the Inner Light is a good example. The Builders of the Adytum is a good example. The Fraternity of the Hidden Light, and those are three that just immediately come to mind as offering really good courses of inner work for those people who are interested in the Hermetic tradition. I think kind of closely associated with that are the Martinists. The Martinist system is obviously, I mean, when you read their literature, it's clear that they consider themselves to be a contemplative order. And you, in the previous episode, you mentioned Louis Claude de Saint-Martin, and he talks a lot about the importance of silence, and he also talks a lot about the importance of love and putting the head, the thinking mind, under the authority of the heart. And by the heart, he doesn't just mean our emotions. He means that part of us that's most deeply connected with love and with wisdom and truth, not which he points out is the domain of the heart, and not necessarily the thinking mind that's always analyzing things.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to jump into kind of a little bit of a grab bag of questions before we talk about the Academy of Reflection at Guthrie. And Rhit, go ahead and kick us off. I think you had a couple questions.
Yep, this is my last one. When I was reading the book, one of my most favorite terms you used was prayerful behavior.
Yeah.
Can you kind of explain to listeners what that means and how they use it?
Yeah. So, I want to tell a little story there. So, one of the things that, as a kid, a little boy growing up in church, I was a very active church family. I can remember sitting in the pew with my dad, and my dad teaching me to be still, to be quiet, to pay attention to what was being said from the pulpit, and to pay attention to the hymns, and being taught that prayer was, that it is communication with the divine, that we are actually doing our best to communicate clearly with the divine, both giving and receiving. And that's a very kind of innocent young way of thinking about prayer. And I can remember that when I experienced that on Sunday mornings, that was a different state of consciousness, that was a more, there was just something really special about that. And so that experience then carried with me when my dad and I would go outdoors, because we would have this conversation. We had it many times about how being outdoors and being really in touch with nature for us brought up a lot of the same kind of experience that we had in church when we were being really quiet and still and open to the presence of God, and welcoming the presence of God into our hearts and minds, that we experience that out in nature as well. And, our ritual in Freemasonry tells us that that's what we should be doing. One of the things that we should be doing as Freemasons. And so prayerful behavior then is the attempt to take that consciousness into whatever it is we're doing in the moment, to be open to the presence of God in whatever we're doing. Like right now, I'm sitting here talking to you, and just the fact that you have asked that question and I have started to think about it has put me in a more prayerful state of mind. And I am more open to the presence of the divine actually manifesting itself between us and through us as we have this conversation with each other. And that brings a sense of sacredness in what we're doing. And I think that sense of sacredness and reverence is something that we ought to be bringing to every part of our life, because every part of it is sacred and should be recognized as such.
Completely agree with that one. I mean, we have such a short time being here. You got to squeeze every bit of juice out of every moment you can.
No joke.
Okay. So the last question I had was, if a lodge was interested in including contemplative meditation as part of their education, from the very beginning, from someone becoming an EA, do you think that would be appropriate, or is this a topic that each brother should find on their own after going through the degrees and perhaps going back and reflecting upon it?
Yeah, that's when I originally wrote the book, what I said was that a person should have already gone through all 3 degrees before they ever start with the exercises. I don't feel that way anymore. We're in a different time, for one thing. I actually know that there are lodges out there now that are encouraging their new entered apprentices and even candidates to use contemplative practices as part of their Masonic experience. And I want to emphasize that they are encouraging it. There's a difference between that and requiring it. I do not think that it ought to be required because, as I have said many, many times speaking around the country, I think Masonry has a place and should continue to have a place for brothers with all kinds of interests. And a Masonry that requires every brother to be a hardcore practicing contemplative is not actually a Masonry that I want to belong to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I agree. It would get kind of dull.
Well, and it would so radically change. That's another thing. It would so radically change. We have no way of knowing. I think it very well could kill the fraternity.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, everybody loves a good party, right?
Well, yes. And contemplatives know how to have fun too. I'd like to point that out. You know, when we look at those early lodge meetings, when the records of those early lodge meetings and the feasts that they were having and all of the spirits that they were consuming and the songs that they were singing, and they were having a great time. But you know, that was part of the experience. That wasn't the whole experience, just like the contemplative philosophical stuff, the deep, profound conversations that we know they were having. That wasn't the whole of the experience either. They tried to provide something that would engage every man in one way or another.
Yep. And I mean, this is not the first time that I brought him up, and it's not going to be the last time I brought him up, but I feel like Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin is a great example of that, because here we have this guy talking about this beautiful, deep, solemn way of the heart and reintegration with Christ, you know, and, you know, you would think that he's like this hermit that lives out in the mountains and stuff. But I mean, he went to all these major cities in Europe and talked about his books. I mean, you know, he published his books as the unknown philosopher, but everybody knew that he wrote them because he went and talked about them. And then after they talked about them, they would go and just party. And I mean, you know, get ripped. and that was not incompatible. So, you know, contemplative Masonry doesn't have to be incompatible with having a good time. I totally agree on that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask this because I guess it kind of ties back to that time, you know, the question, the discussion question that I asked and answered earlier, you know, about the woman that is trying to find a lodge that'll take her. There are some Masonic traditions like Le Droit Humain that don't require a belief in deity. And so the approach for contemplative practices that you describe and prescribe is really strongly dependent on a healthy relationship with God. All right. And so how and how much do you think the contemplative approach changes if a participant doesn't hold a belief in God?
I think it can change significantly. I think I make it clear in the book, just as many other Masonic writers have done, that when we use the word deity or we use the word God or we refer to the supreme architect of the universe, we're making a reference to the great mystery of the source of everything, to the great mystery that is the continuing essence and life of everything. And we're allowing and welcoming brothers to have their own concepts of what that is and their own relationships with that. We acknowledge that it's mysterious. And I think without at least that acknowledgement of this great mystery, that our work, that contemplative work tends to kind of get stuck in a feedback loop that doesn't make room for the possibility of something much bigger and more powerful than ourselves having a very direct influence on us, if not an actual presence within us. And this is not to say that a person who is an atheist cannot be creative and innovative and insightful and loving and ethical and moral. I'm not making that claim at all. But what I am saying is that that sense of reverence that comes from conceiving of the great mystery as something that we can have a relationship with and that we can communicate with, that there's a power in that to open us to transformation that I would not want to do away with.
That's a really good point. It's just, you're not, nobody's saying you're a bad person or anything, but you're just not connecting the same way. Yeah, no, that one was just kind of sticking with me as kind of a question I wanted to ask. But I want to, before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about the Academy of Reflection at Guthrie. Because a little while back, you became the charter superintendent of the Academy of Reflection.
Yeah.
And so could you tell us a little bit about the Academy of Reflection at Guthrie and what y'all do at the Academy of Reflection?
Sure. Well, we're the biggest bunch of weirdos in Oklahoma.
Okay. Good start.
When's the next meeting?
I actually graduated high school from Oklahoma, so that's quite a statement.
Well, it's weirdness is in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yeah.
So the Academy of Reflection is an organization that has been chartered by the Sovereign Grand Inspector General of the Orient of Oklahoma as an official organization within Oklahoma Scottish Rite to provide a society and a school for brothers who are interested in integrating contemplative practice with their Masonic experience. That's unprecedented. I don't know that there's ever been an organization actually within the mainstream of the fraternity that has existed for the purpose of supporting and teaching contemplative practice. So what we do is during our Scottish Rite reunions in Guthrie, we actually host and facilitate group meditations, which is a way for brothers who have never had any experience with meditation to find out what that's about. But it's also a way for brothers who have lots of experience with meditation to get together and use those skills and experiences directly with Masonic symbolism and teachings. All of the meditations that we do are targeted at Masonic teachings and subjects and images. We're not there to try to teach Hermeticism or Kabbalah or Zoroastrianism or any of the traditions that intersect with the Scottish Rite degrees. We're there to teach methods of engaging with all of that symbolism. We don't have any dues. We're a non-dues organization, but there are requirements for becoming a member. We want men who have demonstrated that they're seriously interested in this as part of their Masonic experience, and we're also in the process of supporting other valleys around the country that are interested in having their own academies of reflection. And so we've got 2 valleys right now, one in Pasadena, California, and one in Orange County, they have academies in formation. So they're already beginning to do the work of an academy, but they haven't quite met the requirements for chartering yet. And then there are other valleys all over the country that are moving towards forming academies in formation or starting academies in formation.
Okay, see, that I find incredibly exciting, and I'm not sure you know how excited I am about that because one of the questions that I had written down was the College of the Consistory allows for the formation of satellite campuses as long as there are 5 to 6 enrolled members to lead the group. Are there any plans to expand the Academy of Reflection beyond the Valley of Guthrie? And ta-da, you answered that one. So basically what I'm asking is for members of Valleys that are not Guthrie, that are interested in chartering or starting their own Academy of Reflection, how do we get in on this?
Yeah. So there's a memorandum of agreement that has to be signed by the prospective superintendent of the proposed academy in formation, the general secretary or an equivalent or higher authority within that valley. And then it will be signed by myself and by the general secretary in Guthrie, and a letter from the SGIG of the Orient that the valley resides in, the host valley resides in. So, for example, if maybe somebody in Texas wanted to start one, they would have to get illustrious brother Mike Wiggins to write a letter stating that he approves of the starting an academy of formation in whatever valley that might be in Texas. And then the memorandum of agreement specifies the conditions that have to be met in order to get the charter. I could go into more detail about that if you want. We are soon going to have all of that information publicly available online. Our webmaster is working on it. And I'm hopeful that by the end of May, we'll have the memorandum of agreement as one of the public documents that's available, as well as just a description of some of the other things. We do have a website. It's academyofreflection.org, and there's lots of information there about how you join and what the benefits are and what to do. But currently, the only chartered academy is the Mother Academy in Guthrie.
Wow, that's cool. I can definitely guarantee you that I'm going to be more actively pursuing that as soon as the memorandum comes out.
I could hear the gears turning from here, Gabe.
Yep. Nope. So I'm gonna go get involved in things that I. Yeah.
More things. At least there's no dues.
It's like I'm a kid in a candy store. Like, you know.
Yeah.
It's all.
Well, I'll be happy to help you in whatever way that I can. I'd love to see the Academy of Reflection grow. We've got some very carefully written bylaws to make sure that as it grows, that each academy actually serves the mission of the Academy of Reflection, and it doesn't just degenerate into another membership organization.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So, gentlemen, it's been a great discussion. This is this here is the end of part 2. Hopefully, if God help you if you've been listening to these episodes back to back, and thank you for listening to these episodes back to back. The guy who, I'm bringing up a quote by a guy who we've talked about a couple of times already. I will not stop to examine whether, in the ordinary conduct of man, his will always waits for a decisive reason to make up its mind, or if it is only guided by inclination or feeling. I think he is susceptible to either motive, and I would say that in order to function normally, man should not exclude either of those two means, because just as thinking too much without feeling would make him cold and impassive, similarly, feeling without thinking would lead him astray. And that is by Brother Louis Claude de Saint-Martin, or the unknown philosopher, in his book Of Errors and Truth. So I just thought that was... it resonated with me because I read Contemplative Masonry and Of Errors and Truth kind of in parallel. Like I was reading both of them kind of at the same time, not because of each other, but just that's the way it worked out. And I went the entire time I was going, oh man, what's going on? But gentlemen, I wanted to ask you, starting with Rhit and Billy, what your closing thoughts were on Contemplative Masonry, both the book and the practice. And then we'll let Chuck talk for a little bit after I chime in.
For me, it's How did it go, Chuck? This is the task. This is the labor. Or do I have that backwards?
Yeah, that's close enough. Yeah.
Did get to work? And this book provides, I mean, it's so great because it's like actual exercise that you sit down and do, and it's going to lead you down a path. You may do one exercise out of that book, and next thing you know, 3 months have passed of research for some aha moment you had doing it. You just got to get to work. It's that simple. You may look up, and next thing you know, you've written a book, about the actual practice. That's what we do as Masons. Get your working tools out. We've learned how to use them as a master, and start perfecting it, and just get better and better. And this book is a great opportunity to kind of hone those skills. So I highly recommend it.
Thank you.
So first of all, Brother Chuck, I want to thank you for being extremely generous with your time. This has been wonderful, and I feel like we could extend this conversation, almost indefinitely if you allowed us.
I know it.
I have to say, I've always been a fan, and maybe it's because of my background in IT. I've been in IT for over 20 years, and I see how we get so distracted with the minutia of everyday living. I love the thought of setting aside a little bit of time every day to just calm the mind, still the thoughts, and think, right? Because too often we go through life, scrolling through our cell phone screen, checking what's on Facebook. And in the end, it's like, is that really important? So I love the concepts and the exercises you put in your book. And I definitely intend to continue practicing them going forward. So thank you again.
Thank you, Billy. Thanks very much.
And so I just wanted to chime in with some closing thoughts. As I was going through the exercises in Contemplative Masonry, one of the things that I kept coming back to as a thought and as an emotion, because to me, this is a written passage, but it's more of an emotion. It's 1 Kings 19:11 through 13, I think. It's and he said, "Go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind rent the mountains, and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice." And I just kept, and that to me, that's a written passage, but it's more of an emotion than anything else. And I kept coming back to that as I went through these exercises. And this was, it's finding the divine in the quiet. And that I really don't have a whole lot to say other than that, because some of these were just incredibly moving experiences to participate in. So, but Chuck, if you have any closing thoughts to leave with our listeners, we'd love to hear them.
Thanks, Gabe. I think that the thing that I really want to impress upon anyone listening is that my deepest understanding of Freemasonry is that it is designed to help us. When we say make good men better, that what we're talking about doing is becoming more self-aware and more capable of moderating our own lives, thinking and acting in ways that spread love through the world. And I don't just mean the sappy kind of love that we talk about in terms of affection and those sorts of things, but I'm talking about really deeply caring about other human beings and about the world that we live in, and wanting this world to be the best environment that it can be. And if we're going to do that, we have to recognize that we are the working tools, that our own consciousness is the primary working tool. It's the tool that enables us to use all of the other working tools. And so therefore it follows that it's the one that we ought to work hardest to master. And so I would just ask anybody listening to this to give that some more thought. How skilled are you with that most basic and fundamental and important of all our working tools?
Wow. Thank you, Chuck.
Yep. That's powerful stuff, Chuck. I certainly appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
If you would like to learn more, you can contact us at www.fortworthlodge148.org. We are at Fort Worth Lodge 148 on Facebook. Our email is info148@fortworth148.org. If you live in the 64th District of the Grand Lodge of Texas and you want to promote an event, please reach out to them at 64th.org. That's 64th.org. We have an upcoming event called Texas MasoniCon, and you can learn more about it at www.texasmasonicon.com. That's texasmasonicon.com. We are at Texas MasoniCon on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and the event is occurring on Saturday, September 15th, and you can pre-order tickets for $45 until August 15th when they go to the door price of $55. Chuck is speaking at that event, so please come buy tickets and watch Chuck talk about contemplative practices or anything else that he would like to talk to, because frankly, I could listen to Chuck talk all day about anything. If you want to talk more to Chuck, you can reach him at chuck@chuckdunning.com, and his website is chuckdunning.com. His book, Contemplative Masonry, is available on Amazon, and it's also available at the Fort Worth Scottish Rite office if you're local. Chuck, thank you very much for coming and talking with us.
I really appreciate it. I like all you guys. I'm so fortunate to have met you all through Fort Worth Scottish Rite, and I look forward to our ongoing labors together.
Ditto, for sure.
Definitely.
All right, gentlemen. This is Rhit Moore signing off.
This is Billy Hamilton signing off.
This is Gabe Jagush signing off.
And Chuck Dunning signing off.